The year is 1941. A shadow of war has fallen across the globe, and in the sprawling, urgent factory complexes of the United States, the industrial might of a sleeping giant is finally beginning to stir. Production lines are frantically churning out the tools of conflict: the mighty B-17 Flying Fortress, the sleek, rapid P-51 Mustang, and the robust Grumman fighters destined to dominate the Pacific. The American military doctrine was clear: win the war with speed, firepower, and technological superiority. But even amidst this relentless drive for perfection, there were failures, or at least, designs that were immediately branded as such. And no American aircraft was more thoroughly mocked, scorned, and dismissed before it ever reached combat than the humble machine we are about to explore. From the very beginning, the aircraft was an engineering compromise, a budgetary concession, born of desperation rather than brilliance. Its design philosophy seemed to contradict every lesson learned from the high-speed air battles already raging over Europe. When it was finally unveiled for official evaluation, the response from seasoned pilots and hard-nosed engineers was one of puzzled derision, bordering on open contempt. It possessed a high, fixed wing that screamed of obsolescence. Its landing gear was wide and sturdy, designed for rough fields, but its fixed nature served only to act as a drag anchor, perpetually slowing it down. But the most damning flaw was its power plant. Equipped with a single, relatively low horsepower engine, a far cry from the roaring Merlin or the twin Wasp of its contemporaries, the plane was underpowered, sluggish, and undeniably slow. Pilots who flew the early prototypes reported handling characteristics that were, at best, awkward, and at worst, lumbering. In an era where a fighter plane's maximum speed was often the difference between life and death, this machine was several steps behind. It couldn't outrun enemy fighters, it couldn't outclimb them, and it certainly couldn't carry the heavy defensive armament of the bombers. The labeling began almost immediately within the service ranks. It was called a flying observation post, a tin can with wings, and, most frequently and most cruelly, it was simply labeled useless. One test pilot reportedly stated that if the enemy caught him in that plane, he wouldn't bother taking evasive action, he'd just put his head in his hands and wait. The plane seemed destined for the dustbin of military history. The high command in Washington, D.C., already burdened with prioritizing production of proven, cutting-edge designs, saw the aircraft as little more than a necessary evil, a contract fulfilled, a design that had to be slotted somewhere in the vast inventory. No one believed it would survive a single mission in the harsh, unforgiving environment of the Pacific or European front lines, let alone contribute meaningfully to victory. It was the ugly duckling of the American military aircraft industry, and its failure was a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. The story, as far as the high command was concerned, was over before it began. But war, particularly a global war of the staggering scope of World War II, is a creature of immense and unpredictable appetite. It consumes men, material, and methods, often discarding the perfect and unexpectedly seizing upon the flawed. The American war effort, even with its industrial muscle, could not afford to be wasteful. Every single plane that rolled off the assembly line, no matter how deficient its design, had to find a purpose. The useless aircraft was never meant to be a hero, a dogfighter, or a deep strike bomber. Because it could not fill the high-profile roles, it was relegated to the unglamorous, essential, and often dangerous interstices of the war effort. Its initial assignments were a bureaucratic shrug. It became the ultimate utility player, the plane for odd jobs no other pilot wanted. This included reconnaissance and scouting, the low-altitude view, while high-speed fighters and specialized photo reconnaissance aircraft flew fast and high. This slow plane was assigned to low-altitude scouting, risky, slow visual sweeps over enemy-held territory to draw maps, count barges, and observe troop movements. Its wide wings gave it excellent low-speed handling, allowing it to loiter over an area for extended periods, a capability the speedy P-38s simply lacked. Artillery spotting. In close-quarters land battles, it was tasked with flying over the front lines, directing friendly artillery fire, a perilous job that required remaining virtually stationary above the fray, exposed to every rifle and anti-aircraft gun below. Courier and light transport. It moved mail, crucial documents, urgent engine parts, and wounded personnel between far-flung, often primitive airfields where a larger, faster plane couldn't land. The slow, sturdy machine was initially scattered across various theaters, finding marginal use in North Africa, the Aleutians, and eventually, the vast, logistical nightmare of the Pacific theater. It was in the Pacific, thousands of miles from the familiar bases of America, that its narrative truly began to pivot. The sheer scale and complexity of the island-hopping campaign, moving men and material across thousands of miles of ocean, establishing makeshift airstrips on volcanic rock and coral atolls, and dealing with an enemy dug into impenetrable jungle, created an environment where its weaknesses were, ironically, mitigated, and its obscure strengths became indispensable. The remote airstrips of the Pacific were often little more than flattened fields or hastily repaired Japanese runways, choked with mud or strewn with debris. The P-47 Thunderbolt or the B-25 Mitchell demanded long, smooth runways. But the useless plane, with its simple, fixed landing gear and robust undercarriage, could handle these fields with ease. It became the go-to aircraft for the unforgiving environment of the outer perimeter. The maintenance crews who initially despised the plane soon came to appreciate it. Its simple engine was reliable, easy to repair with limited tools, and forgiving of the dust and heat that choked the complex mechanisms of other, more advanced machines. They didn't need specialized equipment. A skilled mechanic and a toolbox could keep it flying. War, as the old adage goes, has a strange way of turning failures into miracles, of finding the perfect job for the imperfect tool. And on a remote airstrip, surrounded by the crushing humidity and the lurking danger of the Japanese perimeter, the so-called useless plane found its calling. It was a calling that involved flying missions no one else could fly, in places no one else dared to land, slowly transforming its legacy from that of an embarrassing afterthought into something else entirely, something essential, something legendary. The stage was set for the plane nobody wanted to become the plane everybody suddenly needed. The transition from despised utility vehicle to invaluable asset was not a gradual, gentle shift. It was a seismic, immediate transformation rooted in a single, desperate, and serendipitous moment. It was a day when the plane's most profound technical failings, its sluggish speed, its low cruising altitude, and its lack of menacing profile, conspired to deliver a strategic windfall of almost unbelievable importance. The setting was a crucial operation in the Pacific, a tense, multi-day affair involving naval movement, troop landings, and the constant, terrifying dance of carrier fleets attempting to locate and destroy one another. American forces were pressing hard toward a strategically vital island, and intelligence was dangerously thin. The high-speed reconnaissance flights were failing. The Japanese, hyper-vigilant after Pearl Harbor, were using their own advanced radar and observer systems to screen their main assets. Anything fast or high-flying was immediately intercepted, forced to turn back, or simply shot down. The fog of war was thickest where it mattered most, over the horizon. The useless plane, likely a single, lonely aircraft on a mundane, low-priority scouting mission, perhaps observing the movement of small local barges or checking out a rumored enemy artillery position inland, found itself far off its intended course. The pilot, often a relatively junior or non-combat rated airman, was simply told to go look where others can't or won't. And then, it stumbled, almost by pure accident, upon something massive, something absolutely critical, a major enemy formation. This wasn't a patrol, this was a fleet. Several high-value carriers, accompanying cruisers, and destroyers, moving in formation, concealed beneath a layer of low-hanging, atmospheric haze that was common in the Pacific tropics. They were sailing directly toward the exposed flank of the American invasion force. Any other plane would have been spotted instantly. A P-38 Lightning, with its distinctive twin booms and high-performance whine, would have appeared on Japanese radar as a brilliant spike and been met by a furious patrol of Zero fighters within minutes. A B-25 bomber, flying low, would have been immediately engaged by every light anti-aircraft gun on the ships below. But not this plane. Its greatest flaw had now become its greatest weapon. It was so slow, so inconspicuous, and so low-flying that the sophisticated enemy lookouts, and critically, their radar operators, ignored it entirely. The slow-moving, high-winged silhouette simply did not register as a threat to the Japanese command. Their radar filters were tuned to detect high-speed, high-altitude intruders, or low-flying attackers moving with the velocity of a torpedo bomber. This small, unhurried object, perhaps just skimming the wave tops and moving at a speed barely faster than a strong headwind, was dismissed as an unidentified civilian seaplane, a lost local fishing vessel, or just persistent tropical birds on the low-resolution screens of the early Japanese radar systems. The pilot, suddenly staring down at the colossal formation below, the unmistakable shape of the Kaga or the Akagi perhaps, steaming into position, must have felt a cold dread mixed with blinding professional urgency. He was utterly exposed, entirely unarmed for offense, yet holding the single most crucial piece of intelligence in the entire theater of operations. He kept his speed agonizingly steady. He maintained his inconspicuous altitude, fighting the instinct to throttle up and flee. He took quick, shaky photographs and, crucially, radioed back the coordinates, a precise, accurate fix on the location, size, and course of the enemy task force. The message, likely cryptic and rushed, was received by the American commanders like a thunderclap. The result was immediate and decisive. Armed with this intelligence, the American fleet was able to launch a preemptive strike, diverting their carrier aircraft to exactly the right vector, catching the Japanese force completely by surprise. The enemy, believing their position was secure and their flank protected, suffered a devastating blow that fundamentally changed the course of the battle, and potentially the course of the entire naval campaign in that sector. The source of that world-changing intelligence. The useless plane. The pilot returned to the airstrip to a mix of disbelief and rapturous relief, his mundane observation flight having achieved more than 100 sorties by specialized combat planes. The myth of the slow, unwanted aircraft was instantly, irrevocably shattered. The impact of that single reconnaissance mission rippled through the Pacific High Command with the force of a tidal wave. General and admiral staffs, previously focused only on the glamour and sheer horsepower of the frontline combat aircraft, were forced to acknowledge a profound, uncomfortable truth. This, failed aircraft possessed strategic capabilities that their advanced, expensive machines lacked. The operational realization was multifaceted. Low-speed stealth. The slow cruising speed and low acoustic signature made it virtually invisible to the enemy's best detection methods, both visual and electronic, at crucial altitudes. It could slip in and out of hostile airspace for hours, completing long-duration missions without triggering the alarm bells that instantly mobilized enemy fighters against faster planes. Loitering capability. Its excellent fuel efficiency and ability to stay airborne forever, relative to the short endurance of a typical fighter, meant it could circle a target area for prolonged periods, providing continuous observation, a necessity for directing artillery or monitoring troop withdrawals. Primitive field adaptability. Its simple, sturdy design allowed it to operate from the tiniest, roughest, and most forward-deployed airstrips. It required no complex maintenance facilities, no paved runways, and minimal fuel, perfect for the messy, ad hoc nature of the island-hopping campaign. Commanders realized the truth. This aircraft, mocked for its speed, was in fact the perfect tactical tool for the unique, grueling environment of the Pacific. It was the crucial link between the front lines and the distant command centers. The transition from rejection to demand was swift and urgent. Squadrons urgently requested more of them. No longer were they merely a transport afterthought. They became a frontline asset, the eyes and ears of the advancing infantry and the vital spotters for naval gunfire. The factory lines back in the United States, which had been producing the plane at a languid, an enthusiastic pace, were suddenly mandated to speed up production. The manufacturers, who had almost ceased production entirely, were now under immense pressure to deliver hundreds more. The shift in attitude was evident on the ground. Pilots, who had previously felt insulted to be assigned the plane, now understood its unique value. New training programs were rapidly established, focusing not on high-G turns or aerial gunnery, but on precision low-level flying, camouflage, and radio communication. These pilots, the slow flyers, were now recognized as the men holding the key to critical intelligence. The useless aircraft began to accrue a legend of its own. It became famous for rescue and evacuation missions. Its ability to land and take off in a short distance made it the only hope for pilots downed behind enemy lines or for wounded soldiers trapped in jungle clearings. It plucked men out of certain death under the enemy's nose. Flare dropping and night illumination. It flew slow, predictable patterns over Japanese positions at night, dropping flares to guide nocturnal bombing raids or to illuminate infiltration routes for American commandos, a mission that required stability and low speed, anathema to traditional fighters. The psychological edge. In the thick of ground combat, the sight of the low-flying, familiar plane was an immense morale boost for the infantry, signaling that they were being supported and seen. For the Japanese, the plane's sudden, quiet appearance meant one thing: artillery fire was about to descend upon them with deadly accuracy. The aircraft that had once been rejected became, quite literally, a life-saving machine, operating at the knife edge of danger. In missions that no other plane could have performed due to speed, range, or runway requirements, this humble, unglamorous machine was saving American lives, delivering victory, and carving out a profound, accidental legend in the skies of the Pacific. Its utility was its genius, its slowness, its stealth. The plane's transformation from a source of embarrassment to an object of genuine, hard-won affection was cemented by the real, tangible heroism witnessed across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific. Once the commanders grasped its strategic potential, and once the pilots understood its unique, life-saving strengths, the plane was flown hard, pushed to its limits, and consequently, began to generate a stream of unforgettable legends. These were not the grand, well-publicized stories of ace pilots scoring multiple kills, but the humble, life-and-death sagas of grit, cunning, and sheer desperation. These stories spread like wildfire across the remote airstrips and smoky tents, passed on by word of mouth from crew chief to pilot, and from infantryman to supply clerk, reinforcing the idea that this was the plane that came through when all else failed. The crews who flew it were not the hotshots, who yearned for the speed of a Mustang. They were the meticulous, the daring, and the utterly dedicated. They were the men who understood that the true secret of survival in the Pacific was not always speed, but endurance, precision, and the ability to disappear. The miracle rescues. Behind enemy lines. Perhaps the most cherished legends of the aircraft involved rescue missions deep behind enemy lines. The official doctrine for rescuing downed airmen was often rigid and complicated, involving coordination with large amphibious aircraft or heavily escorted missions. But the slow, sturdy plane rewrote the rulebook. There were accounts, verified by medal citations and wartime logs, of pilots landing their aircraft in impossibly tight, dangerous locations. Imagine a scenario. A fighter pilot is shot down over a Japanese-held island, deep in the jungle interior. Search and rescue aircraft could not approach due to anti-aircraft fire, and even if they could, they required hundreds of yards of smooth water or runway. The slow plane, with its ability to descend steeply and utilize extremely short, primitive fields, often just a dried-out riverbed, a coconut plantation clearing, or a hastily flattened patch of sand, was the only vehicle that could manage it. One famous incident recounted how a single plane, stripped of all non-essential equipment, was guided in by ground signals from a wounded Marine reconnaissance team. The pilot landed so close to the perimeter that the plane was under continuous enemy machine gun fire. He shut down the engine, rapidly loaded the wounded men, and took off using the entire length of the minuscule clearing, surviving impossible odds purely because the plane required such minimal speed to achieve lift. He returned to base with bullet holes stitching the fuselage, but his crew and passengers were safe. Another story tells of a pilot who, unable to land, lowered the plane's tail wheel into a jungle clearing, keeping the main wheels airborne, allowing the downed airman to clamber onto the wing struts before accelerating rapidly away. This maneuver, impossible for any fast aircraft, was testament to the slow flyer's stability and fine-tuned control at near stall speed. These rescue missions were not aberrations, they were the signature missions of the aircraft, fostering an enduring loyalty from the combat units it saved. To the men on the ground, the sight of its high wings slowly descending through the smoke was the visual definition of hope. The precision spotting, the eye of the storm. In the intense, bloody campaigns on islands like Guadalcanal, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima, where the Japanese were entrenched in complex cave systems and reinforced bunkers, the slow plane proved its strategic worth daily as an artillery spotter. Standard procedure for artillery required observation from the ground, or fast flybys that offered only fleeting views. But the useless plane could loiter overhead for hours. Its pilot, using simple binoculars and a grid map, could relay minute-by-minute corrections to naval ships miles offshore or to battery commanders hidden deep in the hills. The difference in accuracy was startling. Instead of wasting hundreds of rounds of precious naval ammunition in general barrages, the fire became surgical and devastating. Commanders joked that the Japanese feared the sight of the slow plane more than a squadron of bombers, because its appearance meant, with grim certainty, that a shell was about to land directly on their head. The plane, flying so low it was often targeted by small arms fire, became a magnet for danger, yet its very slowness gave the pilots the seconds they needed to observe, calculate, and relay the critical data. Earning the affection, the aircraft quickly earned its own nicknames, demonstrating the grudging but sincere affection from the crews who once laughed at it. No longer was it the tin can with wings. It became known affectionately as the grasshopper, the flying jeep, or the lawnmower, names that celebrated its simple sturdiness and its ability to operate from any patch of ground. The mechanics loved it because it was simple. The pilots loved it because it was dependable. The infantry loved it because it was always there when they needed it. Its survival was a physical embodiment of the truism that simplicity often triumphs over complexity in the chaos of war. The legends created in the Pacific proved that the only thing useless about the plane was the initial, short-sighted assessment of it. As the war ground to its eventual, weary conclusion, the history of this unassuming machine could finally be written, free from the immediate pressures of combat. The plane never achieved the raw speed of the P-38 Lightning, nor the breathtaking range of the B-29 Superfortress. It never became the fastest, nor the most powerful, and it certainly never won a dogfight. But by the end of the war, it had gained a reputation no one could have imagined, a reputation that transcended horsepower and aerodynamics. It became something far more important than a technological marvel. It became dependable, versatile, and utterly vital to victory in the brutal theater where logistics and intelligence ruled. The versatile veteran, the true genius of the aircraft lay in its utility coefficient. It wasn't specialized, it was adaptable. Its versatility ensured its extended service life well beyond the surrender of Japan. It served as a battlefield ambulance, a jungle postman, a staff car, and the ultimate aerial spotter. The military found that in the years following the war, during occupation duties, mapping exercises, and the endless work of cleaning up the vast detritus of the conflict, the plane remained the most efficient, cheapest, and easiest aircraft to operate from the damaged infrastructure of the former war zones. The plane's cost-effectiveness, once a mark of its cheap design, became its greatest strength. It was the working-class hero of the American Air Forces, performing the dirty, essential work that the magnificent, high-strung thoroughbreds of the sky could not tolerate. The accidental museum piece. Today, the plane is remembered not as a failure, but as an accidental legend. It holds a unique and revered place in military history. Many examples of the aircraft, often beautifully restored, are featured in museum exhibits around the world, where they stand in stark contrast to the massive bombers and sleek fighters. These museums often highlight not the plane's combat record in terms of kills or bomb tonnage, but its humanitarian role, the number of lives it saved, the number of successful missions it enabled, and the sheer volume of critical intelligence it provided. Historians now credit it with being a force multiplier, an inexpensive tool that made the expensive tools, the battleships, the heavy artillery, the bombers, far more effective. The story of the useless plane is a profound reminder that in times of extreme conflict, metrics of success are often redefined. The plane's success was not measured in knots or millimeters of armor, but in persistence and practicality. It showed that the best technology is often the most appropriate technology, and that in the chaos of the Pacific, the slow, the steady, and the simple were sometimes the most reliable path to victory. It never became a star fighter. It never achieved glamorous celebrity. But by quietly, consistently proving its worth on the ragged edge of survival, the plane that nobody wanted became the one that history could not forget. Its service record is a permanent challenge to military arrogance, a proof that true value is found not in projected performance but in battlefield utility. And so, the legacy endures. History remembers it not as a mistake, nor as a failure, but as an unforgettable, accidental legend. It is the story of the day the American military discovered that the greatest stealth capability isn't found in a secret coding or advanced radar jamming, but simply in flying so slow that the enemy refuses to believe you exist.